Hi, Julian.
Hey, Matt.
It's good to have you here with us.
Good to be on. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, well, since I guess we're getting a little pressed for time here, you're a contributing editor at Reason Magazine.
Yep.
We're an assistant editor there for a while, now exploring some new endeavors.
Right. Hoping, at least trying to do a book on disobedience.
Yes, and including perhaps a lucrative sideline on internet television.
That's where the money is, I hear.
Speaking of the internet, network neutrality.
Network neutrality, yes. Network neutrality is, I guess, the hip thing to be really panicked about right now. People are panicking. I saw on MyDD, the blog, a few weeks back, they had the headline, "The Right Wing Seeks to Take Your Internet Away."
Sure.
And Vince Cerf, who's one of these sort of godfather of the internet figures, says, the future of the internet is at stake here with net neutrality. And so for those who don't know, the idea of net neutrality is that the internet is kind of a dumb network in the sense that the intelligence is all at the periphery in your computer. And the pipes over which internet traffic travels are dumb in the sense that they're not discriminating between one kind of content from another. So if you connect to Google Video or if you connect to any other website, it's not going any faster or slower than if you connect to YouTube or iTunes or any other application.
Right.
Bits are bits as far as the network is concerned.
And so now, the worry that people have who think that we need to save the internet, people who are starting to convince me, is that if we don't adopt these neutrality rules, what's going to happen is that telecom companies are going to start, striking deals with various kinds of content providers, other websites you could look at where they will pay, they'll have some kind of arrangement with Comcast or with Verizon, and your internet, will work very quickly if you're looking at, Verizon's partners or Comcast partners, depending on who your plan is. But companies that are sort of left out of that, you'll have very bad service for. And, on the one level, you have a certain number of just kind of like, big companies who don't want to be like shaken down for that kind of money. But also, a lot of what you have on the internet is non-commercial in nature, or it's very small scale. Reason Magazine, The American Prospect, BloggingHeads.tv, and groups like that may not be able to sort of, compete in terms of just being able to offer quality access the way they are now.
Well, I think there are a couple points that are worth making. One is that the idea that somehow money makes no difference in terms of how fast things get to you now isn't entirely accurate anyway, right? Partly because, it may be that Verizon isn't discriminating. Verizon hasn't laid down fast pipes that Google Video gets to use that YouTube doesn't. Right. But there is, for example, a service called Akamai, and a lot of the content on the internet is streamed from Akamai servers. And the way that works is a big company that can afford to do it will have their content mirrored all around the country or all around the world on these different mirror servers. And so, if I've got a CNN, website where the main headquarters is in Atlanta, say, you don't have to go through all the choke points across the country to get the content from Atlanta because it's mirrored somewhere else, closer to me. And so, I think that's one way in which already money is playing a role.
Sure.
But I also think it's important to recognize that the alternative in some of these cases is just going to be that the content's not available. There are applications like high-speed streaming, high-quality video where, in a sense, if you look at sort of the economics of it, and without getting into boring detail about that, it's actually just probably not viable to have some, at least in the near future, a full-time, 200 megabits a second or whatever, broadband connection at a price that people are going to be willing to pay. Especially since there's a kind of a chicken and egg problem where, the incentive to create content and applications that use that level of speed is muted until you have a lot of subscribers. And to get a lot of subscribers, you have to have things that are worth doing. And one way of getting around that is some kind of cross-subsidy where I've got a service that uses really high speed like that, and it might be voice over internet, right?
Sure.
For voice over internet, you need a really high speed but also consistent connection. I mean, it can't just be like when I'm downloading a file, I care about the average speed, not necessarily whether it's at every instant as fast as possible. So there are a lot of these applications where I think it makes sense for for people to want different kinds of speeds, and indeed for them not to necessarily be willing to pay for that high speed that application requires all the time. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to see these kind of cross subsidies. And if that means, it's true, right? It means that maybe Google Video can afford to give you a higher quality or faster video download than I can on my blog. But I'm not sure that that's in itself terrible.
Okay, but here's the way I look at it. Not maybe knowing so much about the technical elements of this, is that sort of the people who are for net neutrality have been kind of portraying this as like a David and Goliath struggle of the little guy against the big corporations, and I've seen people like
little guys like Google.
Right. Well, but right. I mean, and I've seen like the folks at the Tech Liberation Front who are against neutrality. They've been big on pointing out that there are in fact giant corporations on the pro-neutrality side as well. Microsoft, Google, blah blah blah. But that actually makes me more confident that they're correct. Right. That you have a kind of a battle of the corporate titans here.
Right.
On the one hand, you have telecom companies. On the other hand, you have a lot of sort of big companies that run websites or do stuff over the internet, right? I mean, it seems to me that Google's interests pretty clearly lie in getting better, cheaper, more affordable, faster internet into people's homes. And similarly with Microsoft, that I can't think of what they could have at stake in this dispute, which doesn't sort of align with my interests as a consumer. That Google is going to prosper insofar as more people are online, more people are doing whatever there. Whereas, with the telecom companies, there's a lot of potential conflict. I mean, they're very operating in a pretty uncompetitive market. And there's lots of ways that they, I think, could take advantage of more freedom to kind of, screw me over as a customer. Whereas I don't really see what, Amazon.com could stand to gain from having some nefarious purpose in this particular, legislative fight.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess, in part it's just that they don't want to be in a situation where they might have to pay some extra fee to Verizon or Comcast or whoever for getting their content at a faster speed. Right? I mean, in essence, what you have is a situation where right now, if Comcast wants to offer 100 megabit per second internet or whatever, if it's neutral, then everyone has to benefit from that, right? So they do the investment, and then any website who's providing content, in essence, gets the benefit at least of having consumers who are hooked up at that speed, even though, of course, they still have to pay for their own connection on the other end.
And, of course, Comcast would make its money from offering the faster speed because, customers would still need to pay for it, right?
Right. No, and that's right.
I mean, it's not like under the current status there's, no way to see how you could make money by making your internet service faster.
I agree that's true, but I think, again, if you look at sort of the way the economics shape up, the fiber optic, for example, very high-speed broadband that's being rolled out now in a couple of areas, is just, I don't remember the exact number, but it's heavily subsidized, right? They're offering this at an artificially low rate as part of this kind of test and part of rolling it out. But I think to see, just the amount it costs to lay out this new infrastructure is such that having the consumer pay the full price is going to have actually a suboptimal amount of adoption, which I think is too bad, especially when you consider that the internet is one of these networks where having more people on at higher speeds actually sort of creates all these externalities.
Right.
I also want to touch on, you mentioned the fact that it's an uncompetitive market. I think it's worth noting that to the extent there are a lot of interesting possible technologies out there that could make broadband more competitive. So stuff like broadband over Powerline or WiMAX or any number of other sort of theoretical broadband technologies or sort of prototype broadband technologies, stuff like cellular broadband. Giving them a way to make their business model flexible, where maybe they can find a way to make it profitable to get that out sooner, so there isn't this kind of duopoly. I think it's something we should be enthusiastic about.
Right. I mean, that was sort of the first thing I ever heard on behalf of unneutrality, and it sounded convincing at the time. But then since then I've really gone back to my sort of pure, vulgar Marxist analysis of the situation. And why would it be that the current internet service providers are pushing a regulatory agenda whose actual impact will be to make it easier for there to be competitors to them? I mean, presumably those guys, are the real experts, I would think, in terms of, what internet regulations' likely impacts are. And I tend to think that they know what they're doing, and that what they want to do is probably not what I want them to do.
Well, but I mean, the fact that it might be in their interest to be able to make money in a certain way doesn't entail that you necessarily get screwed.
Right, no.
I'm obviously not claiming that it's not going to be profitable for Verizon or Comcast if they can do this.
Sure, right. But I mean, it's definitely not in their interests to adopt regulatory changes that will spur new kinds of companies to enter the market and compete with them.
Well, maybe they're short-sighted. Maybe they don't expect that to happen on a time horizon that will be a current threat. Maybe some of them are also part of rolling out these other technologies. I mean, you have to keep in mind, for example, that Comcast, might be part of the duopoly in D.C. now, for example.
Right.
But these duopolies are not national duopolies. You have a bunch of local duopolies.
Right.
Well, it might be that Verizon also wants to be able to offer cellular broadband, in markets where they're not currently one of the duopoly providers. I don't know. I haven't talked to Verizon. I'm not sure where their interest lies. That's off the top of my head one reason they might, from a purely self-interest perspective, be interested in this.
Well, I don't know. I'm skeptical, but I think we should move on.
All right.
In addition to both being on the internet, we both have Spanish last names.
That's true.
Viewers can see on top of their screen. And I've discovered over the past couple weeks, as the immigration debate has heated up, and I've started writing a little bit about this, that it's a little dangerous to take a pro-immigrant view with a Spanish last name out there on the still neutral wilds of the web.
Yeah, I remember one of the first things I wrote for Reason when I got there was a piece called Lou's Blues about Lou Dobbs and his war on anything foreign, and I got a ton of letters, more or less, of the stripe of, well, leave it to another Latino to defend the crimes of his ethnic brethren, and why don't you go back to Mexico, spelled out Meheekoh. Of course, as I guess the people at home can see, if their screen color matching is working right, I'm a fairly pale individual. I'm a person of pallor.
Yes.
As
am I. I'm also going to note for the viewers at home that my camera seems to keep falling down, and the tripod is a little defective, and so I apologize for any ensuing weirdness.
We can just tape up a picture of you on that side of your screen.
Yeah, I don't think it's so bad. The production values get a little weak here. We need some kind of, I think, low-wage labor to make the cameras
That's
stable.
a great idea. Does that mean we're not going to have the lightsaber fight at some point in this?
Yeah.
To decide who's right about net neutrality?
Right, exactly. On the actual issue at hand, I guess we have a pretty similar point of view here. Although I do know, people keep telling me that I too should go home to Mexico.
Right.
My family, at least the portion of it that give me my name, is actually from Cuba, where we've had basically unlimited immigration from there for ever since Castro took power, and nobody particularly actually seems to mind that. I mean, I guess some people mind it, but it's hardly a subject of great national controversy. There's no such thing as an illegal Cuban immigrant because they're just all allowed to come.
Well, Cuban exiles vote Republican, and
sure. I mean,
they'll stay quiet about them.
Possibly part of it, but I mean, in part, arguably, right? Part of what bothers people about illegal immigrants is precisely the idea that it's illegal. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things you hear. They're criminals, blah blah blah.
Well, there's a strange circularity to it.
Right. No, obviously, but I mean, a colleague of yours, right, had an op-ed in the LA Times yesterday. I think,
right. Mm-hmm.
Just advocating a completely open borders system with Mexico, which, he was arguing would, on some level, solve the problem by basically defining it out of existence. Sure. And I don't know. I'm searching for some disagreement here. So, will you sign on to this radical freedom agenda?
Yeah, I think I will. I mean, we'd have to see. I guess we'd have to see how it worked. I'd be more eager to see something a little more incremental, a little more staged. I'm not in general a big fan of huge, sudden shifts that don't give communities time to adapt to sort of sudden influx. But I think as a down the line idea, yeah, it's something I'd be in favor of. I don't think we should.
Well, that's boring. Because that was also my concern, was that if you did that next month,
right?
Probably something bad would happen as a result. But that, I mean, I guess that's basically the situation we have vis-a-vis Canada,
right?
Where, I mean, it's not nearly the same wage gradient across the northern border, but it works out okay logistically, and I don't know, lets people get a lot of Canadian stuff.
Wait.
It's good for the car companies, because the border isn't all that guarded, so they can put different parts of different factories on both sides of it and ship things around all fine. I mean, it's in some ways a logical extension of the NAFTA logic.
Right. And I think, I mean, it's sort of funny. I know we've talked about this, and maybe you're pro-trade enough that this doesn't apply to you, but there is a strange asymmetry in the attitudes you see in the major parties about trade versus immigration, where Republicans are, at least in theory, or at least until recently, supposed to be very pro-trade and very skeptical about immigration. And on the Democratic side, I guess it's that we don't want to create jobs for you in Mexico so you can come to California and vote Democratic. I'm not sure what exactly the argument is, or the logic is for treating these so differently. It seems like immigration is just trade, where you move the person instead of the widget.
Well, I think it was Josh Bivens, one of the economists at the Economic Policy Institute, where they're trade skeptics. He put up what I thought was the best case I'd seen, not based on purely cynical partisan considerations for being pro-immigration versus free trade, which was, I mean, he said that the structure of the issues is similar, right? I mean, you have a kind of trade-off between economic efficiency and some problems for people at the bottom, but that, both of these things, right? I mean, it's actually a trade-off, and that there's no reason to say that you want to go all the way in one way or all the way in the other, and that the virtue of immigration as opposed to trade deals, as he saw it, was that, for one thing, the trade deals have an awful lot of sort of additional stipulations.
Right.
There's lots of stuff about intellectual property rules and yada, 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 yada. And also that the benefits of immigration to the immigrants are much more direct and clear-cut, whereas harsh immigration enforcement, creates a lot of sort of direct human suffering, people dying as they seek through the desert, blah, 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 and you don't have that on trade, so that he sees it as less like an inconsistent view than trying to have what's actually a middle ground view, and, doing the part of the trade-off that he sees as having less ancillary problems associated with it.
All right, well, but I think on the other end, you can say on the one hand, sure, that there's sort of direct benefits in terms of the people who come here and are suffering less and find jobs. But I think a lot of them would probably just as soon stay at home So I think from their perspective, and also from the perspective of their communities, the people who don't make it over. I mean, in a sense, right, it's sort of the most self-starting, most kind of eager to work people who are going to make that trek, the most physically able to make that trek.
It's like a motivation drain.
Something like that. I mean, I don't think that's a reason not to allow it. I think they certainly benefit on that more from having, among other things, remittances. But I think there's something to be said for creating opportunities where people are, and not just saying, well, you can always come here.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I myself am a dippy globalist, and for all of these things, more or less. So, I don't know. But that's Josh laid this out, and I found it pretty convincing. I had thought there was like nothing to that kind of thing. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know that these are mutually exclusive, right? I don't think.
Sure.
I think he's right to say, well, this may be a great reason to think it's more urgent to loosen immigration restrictions, and maybe that's right. But I don't think that's a reason to say we shouldn't. We shouldn't also be moving to liberalize trade. And I don't think. I mean, if the objection is, well, there are all these other IP problems with trade agreements, well, then let's get engaged on the side that's trying to liberalize trade, and instead of saying, well, we should be blocking it, saying we should be doing this right.
Fair enough. Well, trade arguments are dull, as I have many opportunities to observe around the office. So, yeah, we'll move on. Before the show, we were emailing. We even talked on the telephone. And apparently the National Security Agency knows all about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're keeping a close watch. It's interesting. Well, I mean, we know about so far, of course, the targeted, supposedly domestic to international to domestic warrantless wiretapping.
Right.
And then USA Today broke earlier this month the story about this logging of call patterns.
Yeah. Well, and this seems to me more interesting. I mean, the warrantless wiretapping, I don't know, some people wanted to really get into it, but that struck me as just like straightforwardly like illegal.
Right.
Obviously, law enforcement agencies would rather not ask for warrants before they start wiretapping people, and so whatever. Whereas here, I mean, there's a lot, I think, of privacy concerns, related to this. But at the same time, at least what they seem to be claiming is that they have like a genuinely novel technology, which they do some kind of statistical analysis of the records, just of the fact that, I call you, so on and so forth. Like the pattern of which calls were made, they say they can feed through some data mining system. Although the president, for some reason, doesn't like the word data mining, and was denying that. And that, this is, they want us to believe, like a really useful new tool that you legitimately, I mean, you couldn't say, well, okay, if you want the phone records for the entire country, go get a warrant for it.